Clayton, Kast, head of accounts here at Draft.dev. Welcome to our monthly webinar series. We like to cover a variety of topics related to DevRel, dev marketing. We're joined by Gary, who is the man over at the Catchy agency. He is a pro in all things, honestly, across the board, DevRel and dev marketing, but they build very strong programs over there for their clients. We're also joined by Ryan at Content Lift. He also runs a content agency similar to us, helps teams out on the DevRel and communication point. Today, we're going to be diving into developer ecosystems. So building healthy environments for your developers and technical audiences that will be working with the products that your companies offer. Gary has more of experience in speaking to like open developer ecosystems and everything that comes with that, whereas Ryan can provide perspective on, more like insular ecosystems with some of the clients that he's worked with. Both are very important depending on what kind of product you have, whether it's open source, whether you're more like enterprise focused and everything that comes with both of those. But with that, thanks for joining today, guys. Let's get into our talking points today. I always like to start high level, and then we sort of work our way into some more specific topics, but right out of the gates here, we'll start with an easy pitch. What are the benefits of developer ecosystems, and why would enterprises want to build them around their products and services? So what's sort of like the critical points in having those and why you should be building? Let's start with you, Gary.
Awesome. Good to be here. Clayton, thanks for the intro. Thanks for having us. Ryan, good to see you again. Excited we get to jump in and chat through this. So
yeah, absolutely.
And this is maybe a really good place for us to start is kind of by splitting it up, right? It's a two-part question.
Yeah.
What are the benefits and why would large enterprises want to build them around their products and services? So for me, I always like to start with the why here. And I think for that, you have to kind of look at the history of the tech and the developer space a little bit, right? And the why all kind of starts with, it starts with the cloud wars between Azure and AWS and Google. So we're going back to like the mid 2000s, right? Taking it back about 15 years. And you had all of these really big enterprise companies that were kind of at the cusp of technology and how we engaged with technical audiences. And they found themselves in this very fast-paced and competitive race that had all this. There was really high stakes, right? There was so much money in being the number one choice in cloud infrastructure. So all three of these companies pioneered this kind of developer-first approach to opening up their technology ecosystems and letting developers come in and work with them hands-on and kind of, to take an overused term, kind of opening the kimono a little bit into how people engage with their technologies and their ecosystems. And then you kind of jump forward to the 2010s and you have all these startups, and I'm using startups in quotes because these are companies that are now worth billions of dollars, but you had the Twilios of the world and the Stripes of the world that took this foundation and playbook that AWS and Azure and Google Cloud laid in the 2000s, and they perfected it, right? They built the product-led growth playbook. They really perfected it, and their entire concept and business model was about taking industries and building developer-first open ecosystems around that made it easy for technologists to build with their services and products. So to kind of come back to now, present times, and this idea of why would a large enterprise want to build open ecosystem, an open developer ecosystem, is because now it's a necessity. If you're building in the tech space, big tech has done it and laid the foundation. The really fast, smart, agile startups have kind of perfected the playbook. And now it's really a necessity for anyone who wants to engage technical services and build technical products and services to have this sort of open developer ecosystem. So that's already a lot from me. I know I have the tendency to talk quite a bit. I love this topic. So I'll shift it over to Ryan maybe to talk through some of the benefits, and then we can come back to it.
Yeah, Ryan, from your perspective, it's still an ecosystem in its own right, but tends to be a little bit more insular with some of the clients you've worked with before. I know you did quite a bit of work with Ryan. Would sort of love to hear what your overall take on the benefit is. Yeah,
I'll take more of like a business mindset. It helps you do a lot of things. Helps you build a competitive advantage. When you give customers, especially technical buyers who can build things, the ability to do more into your product, get more value out of it. It gives you a competitive advantage because it makes your product more sticky. It helps them take more ownership of it. They become more dependent on it. It starts becoming a big part of their critical business flows. there's all these reasons why you want to give them more access. And a key thing I'll say, Clayton, like, yeah, I run a content agency, but part of my core function is, buyer market research to then talk to, content and marketing strategies. One of the key things, if you talk to enterprise buyers, one of the key things you'll hear over and over again is, I don't want another screen. I want to be able to connect more things. So the more the great, or as people build out customizations, Rewind's a really good example. One of the things Rewind sells into, they do backup recovery software as part of developer communities for things like the Atlassian suite or Shopify or whatever. As these tools, you hear them say, like, as we customize our tools, we become more dependent on them and they become more critical pieces of operating software within our day-to-day operations. So those are all the reasons why you just want to get more people into your product and expand the ability for them to use it, because it just becomes a pillar of their business and you become a partner for them over the long run.
Totally agree. So to continue to sort of go down the pipe here, like, all right, we know why we need good developer ecosystems. What is the type of content you typically like to see found in those, or like how do you like to see? What kind of access do you like to give the developers there? What should they be able to find within a healthy developer ecosystem?
Who do you want to go first?
Let's go with you this time, Ryan. We'll switch it up.
So I'm not a developer by trade. I just, I work in the world where they rely on the tools. But I'll tell you what I've heard from people who are buyers and users. The type of things they want to see are, how can I use XYZ to achieve the outcomes that I want to get to, right? One of the things that I think marketers often miss is that when they work in a world where you have developers, IT, DevOps, the way they want to process information and things they want to get are much different than when you're selling into other disciplines like HR, sales, and other marketers, right? Just how you build credibility with them, how you build authority with them, how you get their attention, very different. So technical content is really good in ways of like, you want to expand upon this one thing we do in the product, here's the way you do that. You need source code to do XYZ, here it is. An entire category of how you would take the API and use it in various ways. Like, you have to give them all the tools they need to make these things easy and simple to do. Otherwise, if you leave them to their own devices, they're going to spend a lot of time looking for this stuff, trying to figure it out. That's wasted time, right? So that's, I think, how I look at it from a perspective, like what content is key. It's like, how do you build trust and credibility so they can get the things done they want to get done with the ecosystem and the tools that you build? I hope that answered the question.
Totally. No, that's great. Like, we joke all the time here at Draft, like, if a developer can't find your quick start guide within the first 30 seconds of being on your site, they're out the window already. Yeah. They probably aren't even. So it's really just like education. How can they use your product effectively? Yeah. What's your take on? Oh, go ahead, Ryan.
I was just saying, they want this stuff before they even become a customer.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Like, they want to see what's behind. One of the things I often hear is like, I don't want all the sales and marketing fluff. I want the reality of what I can do.
Totally. Or even like, I see this mistake all the time, like marketing or sales teams, like, we need to talk to the signers. We need to talk to the signers. They're not technical individuals, but the people that are signing the documents, like, we need to communicate with them. It's like, yeah, but who's that individual going to talk to when they're evaluating your product internally, and whether they can just build this on their own or if they need to outsource it? It's going to be the individual that's going to be reading and, potentially finding your product successful or getting frustrated by your current developer path. What's your take on the specifics here, Gary?
You'll be shocked to hear a very similar stance to the two of you.
Yeah.
I'll attack it from a bit more of a different angle, which is a lot of the work that we do, which is focused kind of in the consulting space and framing out developer journeys and helping companies kind of organize their offerings around the developer journey. So I think Ryan has this really good soundbite, right? That he says, yeah, at the end of the day, content, especially technical content, is all about giving developers the tools they need to get stuff done, right? Simply, easily, get into your ecosystem, do the things they want to do. And I think a lot of that comes back, you can map a lot of that to the developer journey, right? Whoever you talk to has different variations. Whatever consulting firm you talk to could have a variation of the developer journey. Different companies have different versions of the developer journey, internally, externally. Most of us kind of agree at the base level, though. It's 5 steps, right? You kind of have awareness, consideration, and then a version of learn, build, and scale. So the simplest version, let's agree for intents and purposes right now, is those 5 steps. And you always hear this soundbite in our industry of like, developers hate marketing. It's like, not necessarily, but marketing itself is only one part, maybe 2 parts of that journey. Developer marketing is really focused on awareness and consideration. But even as you get into that consideration and then the learn, build, and scale phase, everything is focused on doing. Everything is focused on developers being hands-on with products, with tools, with documentation. And that's where technical content plays such a big supporting foundational role in all 3 or 4 of those parts of the developer journey. And that, when you ask us and we're mapping things for our clients to the journey, that's why technical content is so important into getting people, just like Ryan said, getting developers into the ecosystem, that frictionless entry into using products and services, and then becoming, hopefully, happy lifelong customers from there.
So both you guys have great examples. What are a couple of organizations that come top of mind that are great case studies for people? And I'll drop the links for each organization in the chat. But who are some of your favorites that you say, okay, if you're learning how to build a good developer program, go check these guys out?
So I'm going to be fast and take the low hanging fruit and hope that Ryan's more prepared than I did, which will be the 2 examples I cited in the beginning of the startups, again, in quotes, of both Twilio and Stripe. We do a lot of developer benchmarking. We do a lot of program benchmarking for open ecosystems for who has kind of the best ecosystems to bring developers in. And those 2 companies wrote the playbook, right? The modern product-led growth playbook, the modern developer playbook. The guy who founded Twilio has a book called Ask Your Developer that talks for 200 pages about why working and being developer first is so important. So those from the Catchy lens are always the first 2 places we point our clients. Ryan, I hope I didn't steal the 2 examples that you were planning on going with.
No, there's a ton, right? AWS is one of the classic examples. You can even talk to GitHub if you really want to go on the nose with it. Like I said, I've worked a lot in the Atlassian space. I think they do a really good job. I think you also have to understand, like, what type of technical buyer are you going after? What's their level of skill set, and like, what is it they're trying to do? So let me give you, we talked a bit about closed systems, Clayton. So let me give you an example at Rewind, like some of the things we did because we understood where we fit in the mix. So we sell into predominantly like IT and DevOps at Rewind. And we started with developers, and one of the things we learned really quickly was they didn't actually care about the product for a whole bunch of different reasons. And then when we were moving along, okay, well, which business unit we're going to sell into, was really interesting about IT people was they were trying to spin up their own version of our product in-house. And it wasn't working for a whole bunch of reasons I won't get into, but it really has to do with like the APIs and how often you have to continually update your software on the end, on your end in-house. So how we approach that from a marketing standpoint is we understand the tool Rewind, like where it lives within the larger business processes of what they're trying to do with their data, which is like the disaster, business continuity, data recovery process. So we talk about all those things, give them all the ways they can build these various tools. They can use us, not use us, doesn't really matter. I want them to use us, but different people won't use us for certain use cases, and we still want to give them the tools they need to be successful because it's good for branding, it's good for our authority, it's good for our credibility. Because why would I want to try and push them towards being a paying customer if I know they're probably going to churn anyway? So what I want to do is give them all the things they need, whether they're going to be a buyer or someone's just going to use our content that they'll share with other people to be successful. I hope I answered the question, but that's like another way that you can think about this, that you're not just in an open ecosystem, but in the closed ecosystem, you're helping support all the processes they're trying to do and know where you fit.
Totally agree.
Before we move on, I want to come back to this really important thing that you said, which I think comes very naturally to you and the tech first way of thinking about this, but it's really different. You said, I want to give them, right, the customer, the developer, I want to give them everything they need to be successful, which sounds so normal and natural to people who come from the tech space. But a lot of what we do when we work with clients who are not tech companies that are trying to do developer transformation or digital transformation, this concept of giving your customers everything they need to be successful up front is so new and foreign. And it's such a difference between kind of the mindset that makes successful developer programs or creates friction or hurdles for developers when they're trying to come in.
Totally. We've had a few new clients we've onboarded where they've been so like enterprise focused and they've got implementation teams and everything's behind a wall where like even our own writers, like we struggle to get access to their documentation or wasn't really fleshed out because there's just someone that gets hired to go do it for them or like, they're just general access wasn't very, like you said, it's just getting it into making the information easy for those technical individuals to access.
Even just a basic like proof of concept. There's so many people that want to do a POC on their own, make sure it works without having to go through all sorts of like big time sales motions and demos that they know is not going to be a useful amount of their time, right? And then when they see the POC works, you're like, okay, you know what? Yeah, this is good. Let's talk more. Like you just, because Gary's right. For a lot of technology companies, software companies, that is not a natural thing for them to do, right? And it's like you're pushing back almost against the culture a bit to like let them open it up a bit.
That sort of leads straight into my next question, which is like proof of concept. So like it's something that's very common in our world is build versus buy. When you're an internal technical professional, you're looking at the problem. You're like, can I just execute this internally at a much more affordable rate under my own salary and time commitment? Or is this something that, we truly do need to bring in another outside source? How's it going to make it easier for me? Showing them that easiness, the time saving, I think is huge in marketing our space. What's your approach to the whole build versus buy concept with your clients? We'll give this one to you, Gary.
Two sides of it from us. One is what we've talked. I'm not going to spend a ton of time here because I talked about it a lot, and that is the importance of developers being able to get in, get hands-on, build proof of concepts, be able to figure out very quickly, right? It's that speed to hello world. How quickly can I evaluate if I can build this or should I buy it, right? And make that decision. I think we've talked about that a decent amount. The other part, which I'll come back to, is again, that content mix, but I want to talk about it from a bit of a broader perspective. We've talked about technical content in the terms that it helps developers evaluate, get hands-on, go very quickly, whether it's tutorials, guides, documentation, any of those things that developers need to get very quickly up to speed. The other part of that, and this is where we spend a lot of time working with our clients, is the broader content mix around that, right? Also the outside, we call it developer plus, right? Outside of just a developer, then when you're making business cases, when you're making use cases, what is the supporting content you need outside of just getting developers up to speed quickly for all the other stakeholders that are involved in that decision? How do you help reach technical decision makers at that next level of abstraction up from developers? Then from there, how do you go even higher and get those very quick hit use cases or success stories that go more to those non-technical business decision makers? And that's when we start talking about, we kind of zoom out from just the developer and start talking about the whole product ecosystem or the whole developer ecosystem. These really strong enterprise programs, whether it be Stripe, Twilio, AWS, who we've talked about, Atlassian, they have these content strategies that reach these different audiences for the same products, but at all these different levels with a really strong content mix. As you can tell by how quickly I start talking about that, like this is the stuff I think is really cool because you get into those more complex, nuanced strategies that meet people with different messaging along the way. It's really fun.
I could agree more. Like we tell people all the time, if we're the only people writing content for you, you've got a bigger content problem. Like, yeah, we'll handle like your technical content, but you need someone like the people we write to care about time savings, how it's going to make their life easier, more efficient, all that. But like you said, there's the higher ups that like they care about the dollar signs and how is your product going to be saving on those two totally different conversations that you got to be able to speak to.
Yeah. I don't have much to add other than I think you want to be really transparent about what your product does and what it cannot do. Build versus buy is not a new business problem. It's been around for decades in most businesses. Software is just different in the last 20 years because just the ability to spin something up it's never been faster to be able to create something and spin something up. I mean, you can use ChatGPT to get source code and prompt it and fill in the buckets if you really need to. So I think if you're going to approach it as a build versus buy scenario, be very transparent and honest about what you have and what you do not have. Because people will find that out and they will share that online. They'll just go to any Reddit thread where someone has overpromised what something can do. And you will see, I always say, go to a website to read the reviews, but go to Reddit to read the real reviews. And you'll
Yeah,
see like how people poke holes in the claims that you make about what your product can do.
And
exactly.
developers want that honesty, right? One of the things we've done quite a bit of over the past handful of years, as I believe each of your organizations do as well, is primary developer research, right? We spend a lot of time on behalf of clients, speaking with their communities, speaking with their developers, and almost 9 out of 10, 10 out of 10 times, developers are like, I just want to know what's happening with the products. I just want to know what's happening with services, even if it's not the news you think I want to hear. Please just be honest with us so we can plan what we're doing accordingly around that. Like, all we want is that transparent, honest communication.
Yeah.
Totally. I remember a guy that used to run marketing at GitLab a few years ago. He was doing a talk at a conference. It may have been KubeCon last year. And he was talking about how they used to like functionality by functionality, feature by feature, compare themselves to all the potential, both negative and positive.
Mhm.
And they saw great success out of it versus like there's sometimes still clients that have to argue on of like they want to shine a little too much light on themselves in comparisons and like, hey,
Yep.
just our personal biases may come back to bite you. Cool. So let's say you got a good, healthy ecosystem built. You like your content, you like how it's flowing, but the engagement's not what you would like to see. How do you guys sort of ramp up involvement, both in like very open ecosystems and then maybe ones that are more specific to the current customer base?
So is the question you sort of have a library of assets, but you want to try and get it out there?
You get it out there and just get higher engagement from within the user base. Yeah.
Yeah, well, to me, that's, if I'm understanding the question correctly, it sounds like an old school marketing problem. Like,
Yeah.
how do you actually get
Very
in front
much
of
so.
people, right?
Yeah.
And it's the usual suspects. So you have to use channels that aren't just your website, whether that's social media, you're hopping in other communities, giving presentations, hackathons. That's an old tried but true. Any type of event. I know a lot of my colleagues have gone to various events where you have an issue you're talking about in your community. People want to find solutions for it and figure out ways to address it, because that's the other thing too. There's not one way to address a problem. There's a variety of approaches. So you have to, we want to have conversations around that, and share these things however you think those channels, or the channels you think are going to actually be the most active for you. And it's different in, depending on the profession. Some of it's the same. Some of it's going to be maybe social media, probably Twitter, bit of Reddit, Stack Overflow, whatever. But there's probably other areas you can put out your content, to get in front of people so they can see. You can give them something they need, like to get back to what are you going to give them to help them succeed in their role, so they actually get their attention. I'll stop there and let Gary take over.
You said, I promise I'm not going to go so off track with this, but it's one that's either perhaps Clayton for another time, for another webinar we come back to.
Yeah.
Ryan, you said this point of it depends on the profession, which is
Yeah.
so important, right? Because it's very easy to look at developer as one bucket, right?
Yeah,
where you're just like, oh yeah, it's our
absolutely.
developer program, right? But within that, there's so many nuances between someone who's a developer advocate, someone who's in DevRel, someone who's a developer evangelist, someone who does developer marketing, someone who does developer content. I think organizationally, especially a lot of organizations who are new to spinning up developer programs, don't understand that. And they'll go ask, treat it like a one size fits all. So anyway, that's all I'm going to say on that. For Clayton, for another time, we'll come back.
I already wrote it down. I'm like, that's awesome. We're going to come back to
We'll do a
this.
follow up on the difference between all of those. But for us, I agree with Ryan. This is more of the traditional. Catchy is a developer marketing agency. This question is something our clients come to us with quite a bit. For us, we have a belief that developer programs broadly are built around 6 pillars, right? You have your portal, you have your marketing content, you have your technical content. Then you get into the other 3, which are more of where you meet people for engagement. And that's your media mix, that's your community, and those are your events. And kind of a lot of what Ryan talked about is in there. First thing Ryan said is getting into new channels with content. And for us, that aligns to media, to performance marketing, getting into newsletters, getting into social media, getting into different channels where you can take everything you've built, whether it's owned, earned, get it out into the world and let people kind of consume all the content you've been building for your ecosystem. And then the other 2, right, are a lot of the tactics that, I'll come back to it, depending on your profession, you might be engaging with a lot. It's developer events, both the ones you're sponsoring and going to as a sponsor and going and meeting potential new customers out there. Also your own events. It's your own developer days. It's your own developer conferences. It's your own webinars that you're doing with developers. And then finally, you have your community, right? This is the group of developers that is traditionally the most invested in your organization, that will consume the content, where your content means the most to them, their success and their career. So being able to have your community be ground zero for a lot of that content you produce is always something we kind of push and urge our clients to do.
Totally. Touch on the community. One that I always see sort of get missed by clients is empowering their power users. So it's almost free, like, dev representation. If people love using your product and they know it backwards and forwards, the good and the bad, like, there's so much opportunity there, whether it's like product growth, like having panels where you bring them in and let them guide the growth of your product, or even something more public. I know some companies get scared by the idea of someone who's not staff there being a communicator for your organization, but usually they'll be gung-ho to write like ebooks, papers, like guides, do videos, be a presence on Reddits or Discords. It's great individuals to take advantage of.
Because that speaks to the authenticity, right? We talked about
exactly.
That. You can have anyone from a company get up on a stage and talk night and day about your own product. That's great, but there's going to always be that sort of buffer of skepticism. If you have someone that's a customer and is really evangelizing your product, that's totally different, right? Like, it's such a different mindset. And if I may, Clayton, just one thing I want people to keep in mind, as you're building out different channels, depending on where you are, really keep in mind how much resources you're going to need to do something. Because it's easy to say, I'm going to spin up a Discord. How is it going to get maintained? How are you going to get people engaged in it? What are you going to put in there? Right. So I'll just say, people watch right now, Draft.dev and Catchy can help you with those types of things, right? Where it's like, we can help you prioritize where you want to spend your resources based on what we think is going to really resonate well with the type of developer we want to talk to.
Exactly. That's what leads to we've been having a great transition between questions here, but my next one is going to be, how are you going to retain the interest of those developers as you've got a healthy ecosystem? Like, you got to keep it from getting stale. You also got to make sure that you're actively continuing to provide more for them there. Like you said, maintaining the community space and the content itself. What are sort of the maintenance strategies you guys like to employ or advise to your clients when you're speaking to them?
This is one we use. We've used this at Catchy, and I've heard Clayton, you at Draft.dev use this quite as well. And this is referring to developer, whether it's developer marketing or all those other professions we talked about it as a practice. And one of the reasons we try and drive that distinction home with our clients is because especially if you're new to the space, part of what you're doing is building the foundation for everything. You're building these channels, you're building these programs. But the practice of developer marketing is products are always changing. Use cases are always changing. Technology is always changing. And it changes very quickly. So this key to keeping people engaged, and what's also hard for some new clients to the space to understand, is once you build a piece of content, once you build your documentation library, you're not done. That's a living and breathing thing that always has to get maintained. Your tools and right, you have your kind of big three of developer engagement along that learn, build, and scale journey, which is documentation, access to tools and trials, and then that clear communication. None of those are done once you build them for the first time. And that key to engagement, at least for us, and when we talk to our clients, is that ability to staff appropriately, like Ryan was saying, resource appropriately. So you don't just throw a shell of a community out there, like the Discord or Slack example, and then nothing happens. It's that practice of continuing to build new content, keeping things up to date, and finding new ways to reach and engage your developer community. Broad answer. That's the consulting answer. I'm sure Ryan has a bit more of the tactical and in the weeds response.
Sorry, so the question was, remind me again, Clayton?
Basically maintenance. So once you've built all this infrastructure, how do you keep it up?
Well, some of that is just straight up resourcing. And that's any business, right? Like a plan and a strategy to ensure that what you've built is maintained. But let's just say, you have to continually feed the machine. How I do that in my world is I always say you need to continually understand how things are shifting in the markets around you. To use like a very marketer lens of it. So what trends are happening? What sort of new problems are people encountering? What are some new ways people have used your tools or new ideas they put in the community that maybe haven't gone noticed, and you can reshare those? That nothing is static in the world around you and your business. Things are always shifting and moving, especially even as competitors do new things.
Totally.
Maybe they've done something that you are doing better, right? So I think you have to sort of look outside yourself from the organization. And that's sort of why I'm a researcher by trade, is like I try to understand how things are moving around in the markets that I'm selling into, so I can take all those ideas and put that into the marketing programs that we're trying to use to push out our content, right? I mean, really, one simple way also is just to use the data that you have internally as it as it grows and shifts and shapes, or survey your base around like what are the things they're worried about or concerned about, and how they solve those issues. It sounds more complicated than it is.
Yeah.
A lot of it is just sort of building the habits inside internally. And it's easy to miss those things once you sort of build the machine and let it loose.
I like to focus on trends. I find most clients usually are organizations who usually know, and they're just scared to tackle it. Like I hear it all the time, like, oh, the search volume isn't there. I'm like, well, if you see the trend and you believe, like, it's going to be there in 6 months. And then 6 months later, I'm like hearing the client talk about, like, oh, we should have written about this. Our competitor wrote about it. It's blowing up right now. I'm like, you got to approach it a little bit different in our space. Or like you were saying, new uses for your product. If you're seeing it, you're seeing a lot of customers, like, or at least ask the rest of the customers if they're doing the same. Like, see if it's worthwhile venture there. Totally.
And it's the comfort with not everything working, right? You want to get into a success rate of most of your content, 70, 80, 90% working, hitting the volume, giving your community what you need. But you also have to have that room for the 10 to 20% of stuff where you're experimenting and you're trying new things. And maybe not all of it's going to work, but that's okay, because that's part of what comes with an ongoing, evolving, always growing, always on community and open ecosystem like that.
Exactly. One of the things I've always heard people say is 80% for your ongoing programs, 20% for big swings of your budget, right? So,
and we'll see like the opposite when people come to us. They're like, oh, we want to learn how to go viral, and they want everything to be a big swing. I'm like, man, the minute Draft figures that out, I'm rich and I'm retiring, because we'll be off to the races at that point. It's like most of it needs to be base hits, and then, like you said, you got your risk takers here and there too. So this next one, I was going to ask, how do you align the business elements with the developer experiences? Because those can often butt heads, and even marketing and business and developer experiences can also butt heads. But I think maybe a more interesting approach to this question is defining the ROI for those developer experiences, so the business side of the house continues to understand the investment that needs to happen there. Would maybe a more interesting way of approaching it. Let me know if I'm getting too in the weeds.
No, I'll go first if I may, Gary.
Please. Yeah.
I mean, the question you're asking is one that marketing has battled
for ages.
Right? Like, how do you prove the existence of the value of your existence? And that's not always easy, because a lot of what we do, we don't see the impact of what we do until maybe 2-3 quarters, maybe 2 years. Because in B2B, no one wakes up and buys a solution, if that's what we're talking, right? But for the most part, even in the product-led world, you could have someone using your freemium version for years until the business conditions are right and they decide to move into a paid plan. You have to understand why that happens, what are the conditions for that happening, and how can you influence those types of decisions. So back to your question, ROI. A lot of it, there's much smarter people than me out there who can do sort of like the analysis and the data regression and all that. But how I like to look at it is, have we influenced more people than the year before, with all the metrics and KPIs? It's a horrible word. The core goals that we have. So organic site traffic, share of voice is one that doesn't get talked about a lot in marketing in our world. That's a key one. Who in the market knows you exist? And are there more people in the market that know you exist than the year before? Then you've done your job as a marketer, right? So I think a lot of it is understanding, have we built the conditions so that a sale or an install has a higher propensity of happening? So it's fuzzier, because I'm sort of dancing around your question, which isn't fair. But that's sort of the battle you play, or that's the challenge you have when you're a marketer, to say the ROI is that we've increased the conditions that we have more, we have more penetration into a market. We'll let Gary take over from there.
And it's a hard one. I think following up right on you, like my natural tendency has been to also dance around this question, because we're the nuance is, when we're in the age of technology and data-driven marketing and everything's trackable, there's so much you can track across the journey, because developer touches so much. There's so many different data points, whether it's product usage or CSAT or all these different things that you can track. And it's very hard. Again, this kind of phrase I keep using, especially for people who are building this for the first time or new to the space, to know what to focus on. So I have a long answer, which I'm going to put in the chat. And I have a short answer, which is whenever I get put on the spot, by an executive we're working with, what are the three things we should be tracking? And we're fortunate to work mostly with enterprise companies. So we get to tie it all back to, like, we're increasing value for shareholders, right? This is late stage capitalism. Everything we're focused on here is driving revenue, increasing value for shareholders. Think of the shareholders. So we always go with three, right? At the end of the day, the question is, and the trackable answers are we driving more revenue from this bottom-up approach of taking developers to help increase product acquisition? Are we building, number two, are we building longer lasting customer relationships? And in that, we'll typically throw CSAT and the measurement score in there, right? Because most companies are familiar with it and have some ability to measure CSAT already. And then finally, number three is this idea of pushing into product, right? Are we supporting product growth and innovation? And that's where you get more into your kind of classic product marketing usage statistics. All right, is user growth going up? Daily active users, monthly active users. So for people who are new to the space, we try and focus on those three. The catchy plug I will do is, we've had Tom Williams, who is our head of consulting and head of strategy, who is far smarter and far more eloquent than me, tackled this project probably like 2 years ago and came up with this developer marketing flywheel that has these 9 different phases of how to build a developer program, how to go to market, and then how to take growth from there. And he's mapped different KPIs to that. So I will drop a link to we'll say my answer was the 101 version. We'll drop a link to the 303 version in the chat.
Awesome.
If I may, just something Gary said that got me thinking.
I think we may have lost audio for a sec. Oh, you're back.
Yeah. No. Can you hear me now? Are we good?
Yeah, you're all set.
So Gary said something that sort of got me thinking. Enterprise companies are often much further along with these because of the history of them, right? Like, they've been tracking these things for longer. If you're just starting out, use Gary's resources and just keep the basics. It's just like, start simple, right? Mm-hmm. You can't measure the world when you're just starting this stuff, because it's just going to be overwhelming. Find the things that make sense for you to measure, show your growth, and start there. And you can incrementally build onto that as you go.
Totally. People, like you said, the day that we live in, everything's measurable. Everyone wants to overcomplicate it. And then you get to the point where you spend all your time tracking instead of gaining your new customer base. It's we do try to break it down for customers. All right, are you driving general awareness, top of funnel, right? Are you ultimately collecting some kind of ability to personify the individual you're speaking to, whether emails, individuals, stuff like that? And then are those the individuals that are ultimately driving your metric, whether it be people downloading free trials, if you're booking sales calls? If you're hitting those three and you have a general picture of those three, it sort of matches the funnel, and that's good enough for most starting their journey. Now, we sort of covered my next question. I was going to ask about, how do you generally measure the long-term success? With everything we do, everything's long-term focused, right? I always joke when we talk to new clients, you sort of have to have the stomach for developer marketing programs and content programs. It's not something if someone comes to you and say, hey, we're looking to move metrics in 2 months. It's okay, well, good luck. I don't know. I don't know what to tell you. That's not really how this works. But anything to add beyond what you guys already said as far as what long-term success looks for you? Do you feel we covered that pretty sufficiently already?
I think you just need to have patience, which is hard to have in the business world. It's never going to happen as fast as you want it to, but when it starts to trend up, that's when it starts to get fun. I mean, I've been doing this, just my own business I've been doing for 3.5 years. And it's just in the last 8 months, I can really see it go like this. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But that's investing in all the things I had needed to invest in over the last 2 years. Is starting a business from scratch. right? So yeah, it's that's hard though. Patience is not always a virtue we have in the business world.
No, particularly when shareholders are down your throat. I'm sure
Exactly.
Gary
Exactly.
is very
Boards.
familiar with. Yeah,
All too well aware.
all too well. So let's maybe bring it back down to earth for a sec. So you just got your first seed or your first Series A. You're actually able to hire marketing staff or a DevRel team. You can start building out a program. Let's help people not lose the forest of the trees. What's the advice you give to people just sort of starting to build these programs? What's like maybe the three things you'd say? Just focus on these for now, and then take it from there.
Yeah, that's and this is it's so funny because this is what we spend a lot of our time doing.
Yeah,
But this is such like this is just the core of the question. So
yeah.
it's hard to kind of narrow it down.
Usually it depends on the
Right.
organization.
Yeah.
Like you gotta know your audience. Yeah.
So I would almost answer this with like less of tactics, and from my end, it's more of principles, right? And there's two that kind of stack onto each other. And the first one is we've talked about today. So much of this is long term. Everything that you're building with developers and technology ecosystems is a long term play. The most important principle that I would give to anyone doing this is make a plan and stick to it because it's a long term play. Make your initial plan, get buy in from the organization to that, and then be very militant about making sure, with room for adjustment, of course, due to the scenario, but that you have your 2 to 3 year plan and you're sticking to it. The nuance, or I guess the follow up principle I'll say to that is also to take things one step at a time. Your plan should be relatively sequential. Ryan mentioned this earlier. It can be very tempting to go out and do everything under the sun because there's so many options of what you can do to reach and engage with technologists and developers. Take it one at a time, build those really strong foundational building blocks, and then build those programs around it so you have kind of the continuity and long-term sticking power of everything you do. The only nuance I'll say to all of that is the bigger your organization, the harder that's going to be. So
Totally.
if it feels hard, if you're working at a giant enterprise organization, that is because that is very hard to do.
It is one of the hardest marketing jobs out there. I love that you mentioned not being reactionary too. I find that to be something that happens far too often. And that, like, if you're always changing, you're never going to be able to show proof.
Never going anywhere.
Yeah, exactly.
And the way you fight that is you have a really good understanding of who you're selling into and why. You know, if I may just again using Rewind as an example, when they acquired their GitHub solution to back up repos, we were convinced that developers were going to be the ideal customer. And wow, were we wrong. So think of how much time we wasted trying to sell into that part of the world when, some really good, solid market and buyer research showed us where we actually should be selling into and why. And what were the business cases? What was the business model? What did they need? How did we build trust and credibility with them? Why would they choose us and not choose us? All these things, because that's the starting point. And then you can start incrementally building everything you have from there because you have a focus on what you should be talking about in market and what you should avoid. Because the reactionary stuff happens when you don't understand where you need to throw the dart in the market. Mm-hmm. And then you just start going all over the place because you see what competitors are doing, you see what other people are doing. You heard sales heard something on a call, the product team heard this, so let's try that. And that's just distracting. And every time you have to spin up something new from scratch, it's an investment of time and money that you can't get back. So you really need to be disciplined on, aggressive focus on where you want to go, and then try that for 6 months, maybe a year, and then see where you are.
Yeah, I'd say 6 months is the minimum. You sort of you need at least half a year.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
depending on where you are, though, right? Because if you're just starting, you just spun something up, 6 months might be just what you need. But if you, to your point, raise a Series A, Series B, you have a headcount of 50 people, you have someone in-house, you're starting to find some traction. Now you really need to be very careful where you spend your money.
Yep, exactly. Well, we have one question in the Q&A, and it happened to be what I just asked. So we pretty much answered that. I think we're going to call it early today, guys, since we've got no other questions in the Q&A. Gary, Ryan, thanks for joining. If you need any help with building, creating developer programs, Catchy is the place. If you need help with market research, customer research, like figuring out your industry, building that marketing strategy, Ryan's the man for that over at Content Lift. Then, as usual, if you need a content program built from scratch with measurables attached, hit us up at Draft. Thanks, everyone, for joining today. It looks like there's a quick question here. Yeah, we'll share that link for the flywheel, the 9 pillars. I think that may have been the link Gary just dropped in the chat above.
So it turns out I sent it to just hosts and panelists. So let me drop it in the chat for everyone.
We'll drop it real quick. Yeah, there we go.
And if it doesn't work for any reason, find
can follow up
on
after.
the internet somewhere, and I will get you a link that does work.
We'll share everyone's info after the call. We'll be sending a recording later. Cool. So thanks, guys. Have a good one, everyone.
Thank you.
Really great to chat. Take care, gents.